That Friday night, sitting on the white leather sofa that cost more than the house where I raised my son, I didn't receive a dinner invitation, but a sentence of exile. Marcos, my only son, and his wife Vanessa, faced me from across the marble coffee table, their faces illuminated by the cold light of the crystal chandeliers that hung like stalactites above our heads. The silence in the room was as heavy and impeccable as the decor, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning system. Vanessa pushed a glossy folder of documents across the polished surface of the table, and the sliding sound felt like a scratch on my soul. Inside, she explained in a voice that tried to sound generous but dripped with condescension, was the deed to an old family cabin in the remote mountains of Oregon. "A quiet place for you to have your own peace," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In that instant, the air in my lungs grew thin, the weight of their gazes, the formality of that intervention, all added up to a crushing, brutal truth. They weren't offering me a refuge. They were discarding me like an old piece of furniture that no longer matched the minimalist aesthetic of their perfect lives. I was no longer a mother, nor a grandmother. I was a situation to be resolved, a burden to be relocated. I held the folder with trembling hands, feeling the coldness of the paper against my fingers, and in the deafening silence of my humiliation, as they watched me, expecting a reaction of gratitude or tears, an old, almost forgotten flame ignited within me. I said nothing. I just nodded, and in that silence, I planned everything. If you love Jesus and believe that this story will teach us something, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of Stories of Healing and Wisdom. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation. I ask that you join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. I have lived in this house for 2 years, ever since my beloved husband Ricardo passed away, but I have never felt it was a home. It's a cold art gallery, a luxury showroom where I am the only piece out of place. My steps, even in the soft shoes I wear to avoid making noise, echo ghost-like in the high-ceilinged hallways. The imported marble floor is so polished that it reflects the recessed lights like a frozen lake, and sometimes, when I look down, I see the distorted figure of a stooped woman I barely recognize as myself. The air has no smell of life. There is no aroma of freshly brewed coffee, nor of the bread I used to bake. Only the aseptic, citrus fragrance of the cleaning products the housekeeper uses twice a week. It's an engineered silence, a peace bought at a very high cost, where every object has its designated place, and anything out of order, like a book left on a table or a shawl forgotten on an armchair, is seen as a transgression. On the white, immaculate walls, there isn't a single family photograph. No portrait of Marcos at his graduation, no photo from his wedding, no image of Ricardo smiling. Instead, there are giant, abstract canvases with blurs of color that, according to Vanessa, represent complex emotions. The only emotion I feel when I look at them is a deep emptiness, a constant reminder that all the memories, all the proof of a life lived with love and sacrifice, have been carefully edited and filed away to make room for this sterile, soulless perfection. I am a ghost in this modern mausoleum, and tonight, I was being formally summoned for my own expulsion. When I entered the living room, they were already there, positioned like a panel of judges. Vanessa sat upright in the Italian designer armchair, her legs elegantly crossed, an untouched glass of white wine beside her. Her face was a mask of calculated politeness, but her eyes, cold and piercing, appraised me from head to toe, noticing my simple dress and my calloused hands, which I instinctively hid in my lap. Marcos, my son, was sunk at the other end of the sofa, as far away from me as possible. He didn't look in my direction. His eyes were fixed on some random spot on the Persian rug, and his fingers drummed nervously on his smartphone. He wore an expensive suit, even at home, like armor to protect himself from the intimacy of that conversation. The sight of him broke my heart in a new, deeper way. It wasn't the successful businessman I saw, but the scared little boy who used to hide behind his mother's skirt, now hiding behind the wealth and iron will of his wife. "Sit down, Elena," Vanessa said, her voice soft, but with an unmistakable tone of command. The use of my first name was like a small slap in the face. To her, I wasn't mother-in-law or Marcos's mother. I was Elena, an employee about to be fired. I sat on the edge of the armchair she indicated, feeling the cold leather against my back. The silence that followed was unbearable, filled only by Marcos's audible guilt and Vanessa's predatory patience. She was savoring the moment, the demonstration of power. She was the architect of that scene, of that family tribunal, and I was the defendant, accused of a crime I didn't even know I had committed, the crime of growing old, of being in need, of existing. It was Vanessa who finally broke the silence, sliding the folder of documents across the marble table until it stopped inches from my hands. The gesture was deliberate, final. "We've thought a lot about your well-being. Elena," she began, her voice as polished as the table's surface. "San Diego is a busy, expensive city, and frankly, it's not the ideal environment for this stage of your life. We want you to have dignity, space, and above all, peace." Every word was a silk knife, cutting deep without leaving a visible drop of blood. She opened the folder and showed me a photo of a small wooden cabin, surrounded by tall trees and an air of neglect. "It's Marcos's grandfather's old property in Oregon. A quiet place, fresh air, a small community. We've taken care of all the paperwork. It's a gift, a new beginning for you." Marcos finally lifted his eyes from the floor, but he didn't meet mine. He looked at the photograph, as if trying to convince himself. "It's beautiful, Mom. You always liked the countryside. It will be good for you to have something that's yours." The sound of the word Mom coming from his mouth sounded false, rehearsed, and the pain in my chest intensified. I didn't see a cabin. I saw a prison. I didn't see a gift. I saw my exile. They were banishing me to a forgotten place, far from everything and everyone, where I could grow old and disappear without disturbing their perfect lives. My throat closed up, and an icy chill ran up my spine. They expected tears, perhaps pleas, but all they found was my silence. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and relief, certain they had won, certain they were getting rid of a problem. They thought they were. Discarding me, but without knowing it, they were giving me the only weapon I would need to rebuild my world upon the ashes of theirs. The smooth, cold paper of the deed in my hands contrasted violently with the memories flooding my mind. Memories of other deeds, of other papers, handled with calloused hands and hearts full of hope. Ricardo and I bought our first and only house in a humble neighborhood in Chula Vista, a small bungalow with walls we painted ourselves, and a backyard where we planted an avocado tree the day Marcos was born. That house had no marble or crystal chandeliers, but it overflowed with life. The air was perpetually scented with the smell of the pozole I slow-cooked on Sundays, or with the aroma of motor oil that Ricardo brought home embedded in his clothes after a long day at the auto repair shop. My sewing machine, an old, noisy Singer, was the beating heart of our living room. With it, I mended Ricardo's work pants, sewed Marcos's school uniforms, and made dresses for the neighbors, every extra cent being carefully saved in a brown paper envelope inside the sock drawer. We didn't dream of luxury for ourselves. Our dreams had a first and last name, Marcos Antonio Ramirez. Every extra hour Ricardo worked, every dress I sewed late into the night, was a brick in the construction of his future. We wanted him to have what we never had: a university education, a job that wouldn't break his body, a life free from the constant worry about the electricity bill or the next month's rent. We gave him our sweat, our silent sacrifices, and above all, the unwavering belief that he was destined for something greater. We gave him wings, never imagining he would use them to fly so far away from us that he would only see us as dead weight in his ascent. The greatest sacrifice, however, came years later. Marcos, recently graduated from university with a degree in business administration, had a gleam in his eyes that was a mixture of ambition and panic. He sat us down at our small kitchen table, the same one where he had done his homework for so many years, and presented us with a business plan full of charts and English terms we barely understood. It was a logistics company, he said, a revolutionary idea that needed an initial investment to take off. He didn't ask for our money directly, he was more subtle. Smarter than that. He painted a picture of the future, a future where we, his parents, would have a comfortable old age, where we could, travel, where we would never have to count coins again. He sold us a dream, and we, who had spent our entire lives dreaming for him, bought it without hesitation. I remember the conversation with Ricardo that night, lying in the bed we had bought when we got married. "It's our home, Elena. It's all we have in this world," he whispered in the dark, his voice heavy with the weight of a man who had built his security with his own hands. I took his calloused hand and squeezed it. "It's not the walls that give us security, my love. It's family. He is our legacy." A week later, we signed the papers, selling our little bungalow, the only home we had ever known, and gave him every single cent. The day we gave him the check, Marcos cried. He hugged us tightly and swore, his voice choked with emotion, that this was the day our lives would change forever. "I will give all of this back to you twofold, Dad, Mom. You will never have to worry about anything again." We believed him. We believed every word. And at first, Marcos's promise seemed to be coming true. The business prospered in a way that surpassed our wildest dreams. With the money came a new status, a new social circle, and inevitably came Vanessa. She entered Marcos's life like a silent hurricane, wrapped in designer clothes and an expensive perfume that seemed to fill any room she was in. The first time I met her, she was the personification of sweetness. She complimented my home, my cooking, and listened to Ricardo's stories about old cars with an attention that, today, I know was purely strategic. She wasn't meeting her boyfriend's family. She was conducting a risk assessment, measuring the weight of our humble origins and calculating how to neutralize it. The change in Marcos was subtle at first. Little things. He stopped visiting us by surprise on Sundays, claiming that Vanessa likes to plan the weekend in advance. Soon, our family lunches were replaced by dinners at expensive restaurants where I felt like a fish out of water, unable to decipher the menu or participate in conversations about golf and trips to Europe. Vanessa was the conductor of this new life, and she directed the orchestra with an iron fist disguised in a silk glove. She never openly disrespected me in those early years. Her cruelty was more sophisticated, based on exclusion and condescension. She would give me expensive, inappropriate gifts, like a luxury spa voucher, knowing I would never feel comfortable in such a place, just so she could say to Marcos, "See, I try to include her, but your mother just doesn't adapt." She was slowly rewriting our history, transforming me from the matriarch into an embarrassing poor relative, a charity project that her husband, out of obligation, had to carry. The first public humiliation, the one that finally shattered the thin veneer of respect that still existed, happened a few months after Ricardo's death. I was already living with them in the San Diego mansion, an arrangement. Vanessa had called temporary from day one. They were hosting an important dinner for investors and their wives, people who, according to Vanessa, were crucial for the business's expansion. On the afternoon of the event, she came to my room with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elena, dear," she said, fluffing a silk pillow on my bed. "I know all this noise and loud people can be tiring for you. I thought I'd ask the cook to prepare a special plate for you to eat quietly in the kitchen, before everyone arrives. That way you can relax and have a peaceful evening." At the time, a part of me, naive and desperate for harmony, wanted to believe her false solicitude. I agreed. Later, sitting on a hard stool in the gleaming kitchen, eating a piece of chicken while listening to the laughter and clinking glasses coming from the dining room, I felt like a servant. The humiliation became explicit when one of the guests, a kind-looking lady, came into the kitchen looking for water. She saw me there, huddled in my corner, and asked with genuine surprise, "You're Marcos's mother, aren't you? Why don't you join us?" Before I could form a reply, Vanessa appeared at the door like a ghost. Her smile tightened. "Oh, Elena!" she exclaimed with a forced lightness. She prefers the quiet. She gives us a little hand around here and likes to have her own space. She's almost family. Almost family. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and cutting. The guest gave me a look of pity, and I felt my face burn with shame. In that moment, in front of a stranger, Vanessa stripped me of my most precious title. I wasn't the master of the house's mother. I was an appendage, an anonymous figure tolerated on the periphery of their brilliant lives. The second blow came a few months later, and it was even crueler for its casual, private nature. I was in my room, resting, with the door ajar to let the air circulate, when I heard Marcos's and Vanessa's voices in the office across the hall. They were talking about the month's finances, and Vanessa's tone was as sharp as broken glass. "Did you see the pharmacy bill this month, Marcos?" she asked, her voice low but laden with barely contained irritation. "Your mother's medications cost almost $400. $400! Not to mention the cardiologist appointment last week." There was a pause, and I held my breath, waiting, praying for my son to say something in my defense. What I heard, however, was a tired sigh. "I know. Honey, I know. I'll see what I can do," he said with the voice of a defeated man. His response was the gasoline Vanessa needed to set the conversation on fire. "It's not about what you can do, Marcos. It's about the fact that this is a bottomless pit. It's another expense, an extra constant mouth to feed. We are trying to build an empire, and we're carrying dead weight. Think about it. Every dollar spent on her is a dollar less invested in our future, in our children. Dead weight." The expression hit me with the force of a physical punch, knocking the air out of my lungs. I curled up on the bed, as if I could make myself invisible, to avoid having to hear the confirmation of my uselessness. The worst part was Marcos's silence. He didn't challenge her. He didn't defend the woman who gave him life. His silence was an agreement, a silent betrayal that hurt more than any insult Vanessa could utter. I got up slowly and closed my bedroom door, the soft click of the lock sounding like the final bang of a judge's gavel. In that luxurious room, surrounded by a comfort that was a mockery of my pain, I finally understood. To them, I was not a mother to be loved, but a debt to be paid, and they were tired of paying. The months that followed were a long, silent withering. I became an expert in the art of invisibility. I learned the house's schedules to avoid encounters in the hallways, ate the meals the cook left for me in silence, and spent hours on end in my room, which, despite having a stunning view of the Pacific Ocean, felt like the loneliest of cells. The loneliness was a physical pain, a constant companion that sat beside me on the soft bed and reminded me of all I had lost: my husband, my home, my son. The few times I ran into old neighbors or sisters from church, their gazes were of pure compassion, a pity that wounded me deeply. I could guess the story Vanessa had told them, that of the poor widow, depressed and confused, who needed constant care and who luckily had such a patient daughter-in-law to look after her. They didn't see the prisoner. They saw the patient. My own narrative had been stolen from me. I was trapped in a web of bureaucracy and control, with Vanessa managing my medical appointments, filtering my mail, and taking care of any pension I received from Ricardo's death. I had no access to anything, no power over anything. I was completely at their mercy, and the helplessness was a slow poison. It was on a particularly gray afternoon, drowning in despair, that I sought refuge in a box of Ricardo's belongings that I had managed to save from our old house. And there, inside an old accounting ledger where he jotted down the shop's expenses, hidden between pages of numbers and notes, I found a folded envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a statement from a savings account at a neighborhood credit union, an account I didn't even know existed. But in that yellowed envelope, along with the dust and the longing, was a truth. That would change everything. That night, back in the silent safety of my room, I did not cry. The tears of humiliation and sadness had already dried up in the preceding months, leaving behind a desert of resignation. Now, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the folder containing my exile on the silk duvet, Something different began to sprout in that arid soil. It was a cold, cutting clarity. I looked at Ricardo's portrait on my bedside table, the only truly personal item in that room, and it was as if I could hear him whisper in my mind, with his calm, steady voice. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with brutal clarity. The veiled humiliations, the whispered insults, the financial control, all culminating in that final act of disposal. They no longer saw me as a person, but as a logistical problem they had finally solved. And upon realizing this, a wave not of pain, but of a strange and powerful icy fury washed over me. Fury for their having desecrated the memory of Ricardo and the sacrifice of a lifetime. Fury for their having underestimated the woman who raised the weak man my son had become. The paralyzing fear of loneliness, which had haunted me for months, began to dissipate, replaced by a steely resolve. Any place, no matter how isolated and precarious, would be better than living another day as an invisible prisoner in this gilded cage, living as a burden, an extra mouth. The cabin in Oregon ceased to be a sentence and transformed in my mind into the key to my cell. They thought they were kicking me out. Little did they know that, in fact, they were setting me free. In that moment, I decided I would no longer be the silent victim of their story. I would become the architect of my own. With a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I opened the folder on the bed. The documents were perfectly organized. The deed to the property, a topographical map of the area, and a legal document, drafted by expensive lawyers, in which I would renounce any future claim on Marcos's estate in exchange for the gift of the cabin. The trap was well set, disguised as generosity. Vanessa, in her methodical arrogance, had left no loose ends. Or so she thought. I went to the back of my closet where, inside an old hat box, I kept Ricardo's yellowed envelope. I took out the bank statement and placed it next to the deed. They were two worlds, two languages, two lives in contrast. On one side, the cold corporate paper that stripped me. On the other, the fragile, almost crumbling paper that armed me. The money in Ricardo's secret account was not a fortune. To someone like Vanessa, it would be pocket change. But to me, it was a kingdom. It was seeds. Seeds to buy lumber and fix the roof that, in the photo, looked ready to collapse. Seeds to install a wood-burning stove before the Oregon snow arrived. Seeds to buy good soil and plant a garden, so my hands would have a purpose again. Vanessa's arrogance was my greatest ally. She, who saw the world through 7-figure bank statements, would never imagine that a dead weight like me could have a hidden resource. She analyzed me, judged me, and discarded me based on what she saw, without ever bothering to see who I really was, a woman who had built a life with far less than that. That night, I didn't just see a way out. I saw a battle plan, and for the first time in years, I smiled. The next morning, I came downstairs at the time they usually had their coffee. I found them sitting at the immense dining table, a tense silence hanging between them. Vanessa was reading something on her tablet with forced concentration, and Marcos was staring into a coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. They looked up as I approached, their faces a mixture of apprehension and impatience, clearly expecting a scene of tears, recriminations, or pleas. I had combed my hair carefully and was wearing the only brightly colored dress I still owned, a simple blue dress Ricardo used to say matched my eyes. I approached the table and, without a word, placed the folder of documents in front of Vanessa. The relinquishment document was signed with a firm hand. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, surprised by my efficiency. "I see you've been practical, Elena," she said, a tone of smug satisfaction in her voice. "It's the best decision for everyone." I looked her directly in the eye, without flinching. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice sounding clearer and stronger than I expected. "I appreciate the opportunity. It's a very generous gift." The shock on her face was subtle, but undeniable. She had expected a fight, and I gave her gratitude. Gratitude disarmed her. Marcos, meanwhile, shrank in his chair. "Mom," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "I just want you to be happy." I turned to him, And for the first time, I felt no pain, only a vast, sad distance. "Oh, I will be, my son," I said, with a calmness that made him shudder. "I am a woman who knows how to build a home from ruins. It's a skill you seem to have forgotten." The blow hit him squarely. He looked down, ashamed. "I'll leave tomorrow. I just need a ride to the bus station." The rest of the day passed in a fog of silent, determined activity. I didn't wander through the house in a sentimental farewell. I didn't touch the expensive objects or look longingly at the rooms that had been the backdrop to my pain. Instead, I acted with the precision of a soldier preparing for a long journey. I packed a single suitcase, the same one Ricardo and I used on our rare trips to visit relatives. Inside, I put only the essentials: simple, sturdy clothes, the portrait of my husband, my sewing kit with the needles and threads that were an extension of my hands, and, carefully folded inside a sock, the bank statement that was my map to freedom. I left behind all the gifts Vanessa had given me over the years: the cashmere coats, the soft leather shoes, the delicate jewelry. They were props for a character I refused to play. The next morning, Marcos drove me to the bus station in a crushing silence. He tried to start a conversation 2 or 3 times, talking about the weather, about the traffic, but the words died in hollow phrases. When we arrived, he unloaded my suitcase and stood on the sidewalk, a helpless giant in his linen suit. He didn't hug me. He just reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder for a fleeting moment. "Take care, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with a guilt that was useless to me. I just nodded, took my suitcase, and walked towards the bus without looking back. Each step was lighter than the last. As I boarded the bus and found my window seat, I saw the reflection of the woman in the glass, a 72-year-old lady with nothing but a suitcase and an uncertain future. But, for the first time in a long time, she didn't look scared. She looked free. The next morning, what I did would leave everyone speechless. "We would like to feel your presence right now. Please, write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now." By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Each comment is a point of light in our healing process. The bus ride lasted 2 full days, a slow, noisy transition from the artificial glamour of Southern California to the damp, gloomy beauty of Oregon. With every mile the bus devoured, I felt the chains of my past life loosening, one link at a time. I got off in a small town that seemed to have been forgotten by time, where the main street had more closed shops than open ones, and the air smelled of pine and rain. An old man named Hank, owner of the only local general store, agreed to drive me to the property in his rusty pickup truck, after looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The cabin was worse than the photograph. Much worse. The image Vanessa had shown me must have been taken 20 years ago. What I found was a dilapidated structure, hunched under the weight of neglected winters. The roof was covered in moss, the front porch sagged dangerously underfoot, and the blue paint, once cheerful, was now peeling off in long strips, like sunburnt skin. For a moment, standing there with my single suitcase on the dirt road, the silence of the surrounding forest seemed to mock me, and the sheer size of the task I had set for myself threatened to suffocate me. Fear, an old acquaintance, tried to settle in my heart. But then I took the first step. I walked to the door, stuck the old rusty key in the lock, and turned it. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty house. Inside, the smell of mold and dust was strong, and the light filtering through the dirty windows revealed cobwebs the size of dinner plates. But as I stepped onto the dusty wooden floor, an overwhelming feeling washed over me. It was mine. Every rotten plank, every broken window pane, every inch of neglect was mine to fix. I was not a guest. I was the owner. And with that single truth, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. The following year was the hardest and, at the same time, the most rewarding of my life. The money Ricardo left me was my one-woman army. With it, I paid Hank and his son to fix the roof and the porch structure, the 2 tasks too big for my strength. The rest, I did with my own 2 hands. I replaced the broken window panes, sanded the floorboards until the beautiful, history-filled original wood appeared from under layers of grime, and painted the walls a pale yellow that seemed to soak up the sunlight. My hands, which in San Diego had been busy wringing themselves with anxiety in my lap, were now perpetually dirty with soil, stained with paint, or pricked by sewing needles. I planted a garden out back, just like the one I had in Chula Vista, and when the first tomatoes, squashes, and heads of lettuce sprouted from the dark earth, I cried with joy. Slowly, the small, suspicious community around me began to take notice. They didn't see a frail, pitiful old lady, but a woman who worked from sunrise to sunset. I began to trade my skills for help and supplies. I mended the lumberjack's clothes in exchange for firewood for the winter. I baked a batch of cornbread for Hank's wife in exchange for fresh eggs. For the town's fall festival, I sewed a patchwork quilt from fabric scraps, which became the centerpiece of the church auction. Slowly, the abandoned cabin became a landmark, and I, the lady from the city, became simply Elena. My home, unlike my son's cold mansion, had no luxury, but it smelled of baking bread, the sound of laughter when a neighbor stopped by for coffee, and the warmth of a crackling fire in the hearth. In San Diego, I had everything and was nothing. Here, I had almost nothing, and I was everything. It was on an autumn afternoon, a little over a year after my departure, that the past came knocking on my door. I was on the porch, shelling green beans for dinner, when a luxury car, black and shiny, appeared on the dirt road, as out of place as a panther in a chicken coop. The vehicle stopped in front of my fence, and my heart skipped a beat. The driver who got out was not the powerful, arrogant man I remembered. It was Marcos, but an emptied version of him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, he was unshaven, and his eyes, once full of a cold confidence, were now sunken and haunted. He walked slowly to my gate, like a man, heading to the gallows, and looked at my little cabin, at the flowers in my windows, and at the smoke rising from my chimney with an expression of desperate longing. He said nothing for a long time, just stared at me, and then tears began to roll down his face. He fell apart right there, in front of the home I had built from the ruins he had given me. He told me everything in broken sobs. A risky business deal gone wrong, bankruptcy, the loss of everything. And Vanessa, predictably, had abandoned him the moment the money dried up, taking with her the cars, the jewelry, and what was left of his dignity. "I've lost everything, Mom," he cried, his voice muffled. "I have nothing, nowhere to go. I was so foolish. I miss you so much. I miss everything. Please, forgive me. Let me stay here. I can work. I'll help chop wood. I'll fix whatever needs fixing. Please, I just need my mom." He was offering me his broken pieces, expecting me, as always, to glue them back together. I listened to him in silence, letting him empty out all the pain, guilt, and self-pity he was carrying. There was no triumph in my heart, no bitter satisfaction of, "I told you so." There was only a deep sadness for the boy I had raised and the man he had failed to become. When he finished, his face buried in his hands, I stood up, went to the stove, and ladled hot vegetable soup into a bowl. I placed the bowl in front of him with a piece of bread I had baked that morning. "Eat," I said softly. "You look starved." He ate in silence, with the voracity of a man who hadn't had a decent meal in days. When the bowl was empty, he looked up at me, childish hope shining through his desolation. It was then that I sat down across from him and took his hands, which now seemed strangely fragile in mine. "I forgive you, Marcos," I said, and the words were true. I said them more for myself than for him, to release the last ghost that haunted my heart. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting the lesson. What you lost wasn't the money. It was your character, and that's not something I can give back to you. I went to a small metal box where I kept my savings, took out a small amount of money, and placed it in his hand. "This is for a bus ticket and a place to stay for a few nights. Start over, my son, but start over the right way, with honest work and clean hands. The home you're looking for isn't this one. It's the one you need to build inside yourself. He looked at me, finally understanding. This was no longer his safe house. I was no longer his unconditional safe harbor. I watched him leave in the car that would soon no longer be his, a diminished man taking with him the consequences of his choices. Today, I don't have the luxury he once offered me, but I have the respect he never gave me, and that no one can ever take from me again.